Hey all, Siege here, and today I want to discuss the exploits of the Hex, us coming to be a trusted companion within their team, a captain of sorts even, someone the previous de facto leader now appears to trust with his very life. And that's a victory in its own right, no doubt. This same feeling most likely resonates for all of them now, provided you put the time in to make it so. But the question I keep coming back to is, was it the right choice? Especially with other proto-frames finding our group and joining forces, we are then subjected to new relationships, ones in which we take on a similar role. The story of Temple is born from our interactions with them. Flare, the human singled out by Entrati for WARFRAME amalgamation, and while likely an unintended consequence, after being exposed to Flare's newly tech-rot-infested blood, the very guitar itself becomes a Helminth, awfully similar in nature to the one we all know and, well, we all know. I'm guessing relationships vary depending on how frequently one must feed them, especially if resources have become scarce as a result. Regardless, their transformation was made certain by Entrati, or at least his visage, by forcing it with the emotional sledgehammer of being witness to the entirety of the Ripper's band murdered during the very show they were commissioned to play, with Flare bearing much of the responsibility for the booking. And it's only through discussions with the Drifter that these two entities are able to learn to coexist, in this case just coming to accept the reality of their combined situation, their future form as an actual warframe, and that they both want the best for each other, regardless if some aspects of their misunderstanding might be seen as downright horrific. They are supposedly fated to also be there the moment the Tenno turn on the organ, even acting as an essential part of the coup. In many ways, very close to confirming outright the method by which time travel works in WARFRAME. From what we've been offered so far, the story appears to be largely following, or is in fact just utilizing, what most understand as the bootstrap paradox. For those unfamiliar with the idea, the bootstrap or temporal paradox is a time travel paradox in which the consequences of an event in the future travel back in time and cause an event in the past or present, which in turn is among the causes of the first event, forming a causal loop in which each event is caused by the other, and it's called this due to its association with the term pulling yourself up by your bootstraps.
Which by our calculations is fucking impossible, man.
You can't literally pull your own boots or shoes up to make yourself go higher, but essentially it allows for the loop itself to somehow be responsible for the origin. In this particular case, the Drifter coming back to 1999 and helping Flare become Temple in order to inspire the future uprising against the Orkin.
Upon the arrival of the wretched Tenno, you struck. Out of what? A desire for redemption? You thought to strike the Orkin where it hurt. Their laboratories, their edifices of government, their homes. To distract, to buy time. Idiot. You are charged with treason. You saw the new generation of your kind, and the Tenno whose deviltry blent with theirs. And you began to whisper corruption into their ears, weave dark thoughts through the coils of their minds, incepting, as is your wont, chaos and disaster. You are charged with espionage. The night of the Naga drums. Your incepted chaos bloomed, and the beautiful gilded empire fell. Were you entirely responsible? You, a fool. But one need not be entirely responsible for the murder of an empire to be punished for their role in it. And punished you shall be.
that would happen, linearly at least, centuries after the fact, creating a paradox that does not allow for a fixed origin point, and thus, the loop itself is thought as the origin. It's used frequently in storytelling because it's quite frankly an easy way out of time paradoxes that would most certainly arrive in any time travel story. I only tell you this because it's just much easier to explain the story of Temple overall with this additional context. And yes, they will be there, literally playing the soundtrack for our slaughter of the Seven, making it to Pluto, where the incident occurs via a satellite of unknown origin. And I gotta wonder, is it a piece of the exploded Earth I postulated in part 1? Tough to say, but what can be said for certain is they will be there. And if not for the Drifter, one might even consider the Tenno's uprising to have been in jeopardy should they not have intervened. And it's true, because it's so much easier to work out and do heavy reps to tasty guitar riffs, so I can see why it was necessary Temple be there. Oh yeah, I get it. And then there's Minerva and Velimir, the Saren and Frost proto-frames respectively. An ailing couple, mostly distant from each other due to a singular decision they had contrasting opinions on. That being the direction their adopted daughter, Nisi Rizalka, should choose for herself. Both coming from a place of love, mind you. The Frost proto-frame's innate desire to allow his little bird to fly with her own wings. Her capability proven to him time and time again through their own incredible yet oddly controlled actions. This level of emotional maturity in his mind earned her the right to make her own decisions in life, and thus Nisi's desire to join Skaldra and carve her own place in the world, buoyed by the stories of both her parents' tales of their own military exploits, of course, themselves agents of the highest degree, meeting and getting to know, appreciate, and trust each other, of course, under similar circumstances. Unfortunately, through some of those adventures, Minerva, the Saren proto-frame, came to know exactly what Skaldra was about. And now that we too understand their tactics, I assume we can understand her desire to forbid Nisi from dealing with such an unsavory consortium. So what to do? Well, they were firm on their positions, and Nisi chose her own path that unfortunately would lead her directly to Entrati, and by extension, the Indifference. And it found itself another host in her very unique persona, one we've become quite familiar with, and this conflict of opinions crippled the once sacred bond the two soldiers shared both on and off the battlefield. In this scenario, what would you have done if it were your child? In some ends, they reconcile. In others, they don't. But what's important is they're both able to let go of Nisi in the end. Minerva puts it best in one of her dialogue threads, where they don't end up together. She says, "Not every story has a happy ending, Drifter. Sometimes that's okay. Without tears, we wouldn't know how to laugh. Without death, life would have no meaning. And without a yesterday, we wouldn't appreciate a new tomorrow." Minerva, she's prepared. They both are. Hopeful for the best, but reserved for the worse. And it's certainly a hard line to walk, no doubt, but one that is often all too necessary. It's perhaps a pity this idea was not more respected in regard to the twisted love affair of Alice and Margulis, and of course all of what it wrought across the origin system. Entire societies crumbled, movements were destroyed, the very fate of the Warframe universe was indelibly changed, due solely to the feelings these two people had for each other. But that is a story for another video, as I could do it no justice within the time restraints of this one. But one can see the possible devastation such consumed ideologies can bring about. And it's within this context that forces me to also see a mindset I personally don't believe has ever changed for Entrati, even after witnessing or being the very cause of any or all of this. I've noticed many want so badly to believe that he's changed, transformed his cogent absolutism about the indifference he brought upon the universe, now coming to value life, value love. but I would caution taking too much stock in that position, as his views on destroying Albania and the Hex remained consistent right up until the time he was whisked away by the Indifference. And with that in mind, I would have to ask, when would this new epiphany of his have struck? And what was it that changed his mind so drastically, especially within such a short period of time, and with no real evidence of him watching anything that happened on the Zariman to the Drifter, or even what occurred with the other members of the Hex, unless the Indifference allowed it to be so? It's more than likely the Indifference would have had to allow his presence on the Zariman here in the first place, as earlier in the quest it's made quite clear that Albrecht can't just escape from its grasp. So, either they're working together, or this isn't him. And it makes sense, as watching the proto-frames and the Drifter become friends isn't even part of the goal here, is it? Why did Entrati want the bomb to go off in the first place? What is this spark, and why would keeping the loop going provide him with it, if destroying the entire place would have also done the same? No, there's something more nefarious at play here, and I think with enough time we're going to see that. Of course, I've been wrong before, but even if I am, it shouldn't change the nature by which we try to deal with the man in the wall, at least in my opinion. And in this case, the reason why it's particularly imperative is that the Void entity, while typically playful and mischievous, at least in the interactions we've had, is not something to be trifled with because of its very nature. You see, it doesn't possess or even desire to possess the gift of experience. Sure, it can mimic mannerisms and personalities, but it doesn't understand what made those personalities. Events within each individual shape their understanding of the human condition, and thus produce a behavior pattern best suited to deal with their environment. But this knowledge only comes through time and experience. Feeling the emotions that come with that, with each specific moment producing a hearty and exceedingly complex insight into the rigors of being, the intricacies of social interaction, and the fragile line one must sometimes walk, even amongst those they considered closest to them. We all understand how to live in our world, and this comes from being forced to live in it, powerless, with only basal survival instincts as guideposts for what will hopefully be a long and happy life. But of course, none of it is gifted to us. Rather, it's earned through repetitive interaction with different situations. Now consider the Void and what it understands. Aside from potentially Rel, no one has shown any real power against it. No one has injured it in any meaningful way or caused it to rethink its positions on a subject. And that's because it doesn't have to. It has no need or desire to conform to what our society deems acceptable, and thus can do whatever it feels like doing. I'm strangely reminded of an old Twilight Zone skit entitled "It's a Good Life" that many of you may be familiar with. But for those who are not, the story revolves around a child living within a particular small town of no renown, but this child has, for lack of a better term, held everybody within the area hostage to his every whim. This is because the child has the ability to manipulate reality, not just for himself, but every person he comes into contact with. Their very thoughts must stay as happy as humanly possible, and at all costs resist any negative feelings they may have towards this dark Franklin Richards clone, or even towards themselves, because he is privy to everything they say, everything they do, everything they think. And although none of the townsfolk are in jail, chains, or binds, they live in perhaps the most sinister prison available, the prison of the mind. Why? Because that's one you can't escape. And this seems like the growing plight of those within the Origin system. But maybe even worse than that, Duviri, 1999, perhaps even the Great Tau, the paradise everyone seems to want to get to for reasons no one has really ever explained, all potentially facilitated by our own actions, as well-meaning as they may have been. They say the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and the Tenno, as well as Entrati, may be learning that lesson in real time. In fact, it may be the very message Entrati is so determined to somehow, some way, force the children of the void to see that problems with letting go can be another kind of prison, one that others may even exploit. Staying in a bad, even damaging relationship due to the fear of being alone, remaining in an unrewarding or even toxic place of employment because of the quote-unquote stability, familiarity, or even money, continuing ties with a family member that incessantly treats them with a level of exceptional cruelty, sometimes for years or even decades at a time, mainly due to their blood relation. There's very few who can't envision a time when they too willingly put themselves through sometimes situations that could even be considered torture because of the perceived loss of something. And that doesn't even get into what I feel Entrati is dealing with, and what we will most certainly have to come to terms with at some point. Sacrificing yourself for those you love or even those you've never met. This is an idea that I think has clouded the entire discord around the term indifference in Warframe. And that very well may be intentional, given the trickster mentality of the Void entity, at least from the perspective of both Duviri's hollow children and our own doppelganger. We've been led to believe choosing indifference is bad, but in reality, it's more of a gray area, and in this situation, could be considered a shield. Probably the greatest misunderstanding of this entire concept, at least of the time, is that of the Jedi within Star Wars. There's probably no better example, in fact. Warriors who actively shuttered their emotions in order to keep their mind clear of distraction or even personal manipulation. While the concept has been muddied through the Legends, Clone Wars, and myriad of new projects that seem to show up these days, the idea that Jedi were taught to exist as unfeeling creatures forbidding love at all costs is a fallacy at best. They all felt love, sometimes as great as any have ever experienced, but willingly chose not to act on it. Because loving another means putting one or more, depending on how slippery the slope becomes, above other people. And for someone who needs to be impartial, especially in attempting to keep peace amongst an entire galaxy of individuals, one can see how this might at least offer temptation to side with one group potentially even before seeing any kind of evidence. A natural bias formed without any specific context regarding the situation in question. For people of power, do you see how dangerous that is? Of course you do, because you live in this world and see elected officials, celebrities, and just general people of influence bought and paid for every day. And please, before anyone puts a specific group in the comments who's quote-unquote worse than the others, just save your breath. Because the real problem isn't the other side. It's groups who should be keeping their own side in check before they ever consider trying to ask someone else to. Something, well, no one really does anymore. And I suspect it's because it keeps the fight going. It allows everybody to act in whatever way they feel necessary. And until this happens, essentially, no one's ever going to clean up anything, because they will continue to die on the hill of, well, we're like this because they do this, forever ceding any high ground and continuing to let people on all sides act as terrible as they like. It's the cosmic joke, and all I can do is watch it all and laugh, because to not do so would leave me in a state of perpetual sadness. And that is what Entrati is attempting to show the Drifter.
Only resolute action remained. If I must be a demon, let me be an honest one. Let me prove my nature by what I do next.
He says it himself. Entrati's one-track mind is fueled by the concept of eradicating what he brought into the universe by any means imaginable. And if it costs him all, it will be a price he's undoubtedly willing to pay. And without condoning or condemning, I understand. I understand that, at least from the perspective of Albrecht, these emotional ties may be the ones that bind us, all of us, to an eventual grave. And in a really crazy way, it makes me overwhelmingly sad. If in fact the Kalimo sequence was just another part in the Man in the Wall's overarching scheme to achieve a harmony or unity among its heralds, ending as it began in the same fashion we are shown multiple smaller scale representations of in the Sanctum, the Fragment becoming one, for instance. And after having manipulated the Tenno into essentially freeing and even calling in ways the same indifference that appeared so effectively chained for so long, now only to be used as a conduit, bypassing Entrati's own method of restraint.
The strand of Kra has been cut, while the Indifference remains undeterred. I foresee a grim and continuing struggle to safeguard Papa's laboratory from its fell and ruinous grasp.
In what was supposedly a victory for the Tenno. This moment, perhaps even damning the Hex and the people of Halvania into a year-long Groundhog Day scenario, with no way in ever changing it. I often wonder if Entrati believed that by ending this form, Major Rusalka too would be freed of, well, life, assumedly at least, but this place, a perpetual year, lived over and over. For context, the character Phil Connors in the movie Groundhog Day is estimated to have lived the same day over and over again for about 10 to 30 years. But his book counterpart, well, that was a cool 10,000. How many cycles have we already been through? Think about how many people have already stopped grinding Halvania because they got what they wanted. Yet, the ball there, that ball just keeps on bouncing for the people still forced into this life. Imagine if the citizens of Halvania knew the truth. This entire mall, one teeming with life, now that we've succeeded. What if one cycle were to divulge into chaos? The sheer torment of living this existence over and over again, it would wear on anyone, pure and simple. Even, and I'd say especially, the Hex. I can't stress enough how leaving Halvania and 1999 as a whole at this point in the story feels incomplete with so much left undone, even with Kaya's success in certain cross strands. She is a uniquely motivated lady, and I would imagine most, whether they agree or disagree with what she did to cause herself such a scenario, would feel the exact same way she did after the fact. The incredible need to just disappear. Compromising photos are a hell of a thing for anyone to deal with, but it's always much worse when it stems from betrayal of those people trust. And Kaya is feeling this in such an extreme manner that she decides to utilize her very keen mind to instead leave the timeline in its entirety. How's that for disappear? And through her already established dread fascination with the internet, as well as a combination of her own exceptional intellect and a lot of communication with the Drifter, a being that's already natively possessing the ability to move through timelines, whether it be a product of Albrecht's, Lloyd's, Euleria's, or even something else's ingenuity, she is the first to do it without Entrati's technology offering assistance in some way. Well, not as hardware, at least. Because she did speak to him. In fact, it's insinuated that it was through this same one-track-minded mentality with time travel that she eventually found Albrecht, or someone at least that looked like him. And although she claims he was scared of her, I believe we can probably surmise that this was a tactic to throw Kyle off, no matter which version she saw, and accept his knowledge, direction, and of course, path towards her true desire, time travel. Of course, needing to turn her into a proto-frame using the Nova strain of Helminth to facilitate that transformation. Very monkey paw of him, wouldn't you say? And credit where it's due. Her ability to have figured this out, even with just his notes and information from us, is insanely impressive. But before we get too hopeful. Dialogue found in her messages seems to insinuate the nature of her void travel only facilitates her trip and wouldn't necessarily be safe for the other Hex. So how long will they have to remain in this hell? 1 year? That's dead certain at this point, but how many more? A member of the channel pointed out to me that the German Hall is another name for hell, and the term Vania suggests, well, it's a suffix that seems to carry multiple subtle meanings, but taken in context as part of the name of an area, it could very well mean forest, a kind of truncated version of Pennsylvania or Transylvania. And it does line up with what we're told during the quest, at least, and I would assume that this isn't just us, but for all the tenants of Halvania, maybe even all of those trapped in this very loop. Ironic that the only ones who can easily leave Halvania are Tenno, demons with, for a lack of a better term, free passage in and out of hell.
Entrati, what devils follow you?
And on the matter of Kai leaving in her own way, imagine, though, if Kai was able to bring more through her portal, with more time and research. I would imagine in the interim, at least, this would seem like an incalculable triumph. We win. And although it wasn't us that actually figured this out, our drifter clearly played a role in her research. And to me, this would essentially end the tale of 1999, because with everyone out, this Groundhog Day can essentially end for all, as it seemingly already has for her. Not for nothing, though, but do you know the story of the little boy and the Zen master? See, there's this little boy, and on his 16th birthday, he gets a horse as a present. And all the people within his village say, "Oh, how wonderful." But the Zen master in the village says, "We'll see." A few years later, the boy is riding and gets thrown off the horse and hurts his leg. He's no longer able to walk, and so all the villagers say, "Oh, how terrible." But the Zen master says, "We'll see." Now some more time passes, and the village goes to war. All of the other young men get sent off to fight, but this boy can't fight because his leg is all messed up. And all the villagers say, at least for him, "How wonderful." And the Zen master says, "We'll see." Do you get it? You know, there was more than likely a very specific reason that Albrecht had Lloyd destroy what would appear to be the only machine capable of traveling to these strands of Craw at the beginning of Whispers in the Walls. Now, why do you think that is? And it would very much seem that this actually sealed the area off, if not for, well, our arrival. It's the only real explanation. We've now come to understand that the operator or drifter, obviously of great interest to the Indifference.
You, my child, the great Indifference wants to take. I want to let it. I feel only the call. You, my champion, please drown out that noise that beckons. If any other answers the call, no, it has to be you. Our paradox.
And within the transference meant to move the operator from Warframe to vessel during Whispers in the Walls, it either caught a ride, or given how it describes this place, may have utilized the connection it already knew the vessels shared with their proto-frame counterparts to induce the trip back to where it believed Entrati was. And although this is, again, speculation, in the time it took us to direct Arthur to the mall area, that may very well have been enough for it to both engage and maybe even kidnap the real Albrecht. The result of which being shown during Rizalka's interrogation during the Hex quest. An interesting little tidbit is that attempting to walk up the escalator proves impossible because of a very, very familiar sand, kind of barrier, if you will. Now, where have I seen that before? perhaps even better than that, for the intrepid Tenno who decided to venture to the back of the subway first while believing to have uncovered some great secret in an appearance of the Tenno's own doppelganger hiding within the tech rod. Perhaps a bit of symbolism in its own right, mind you, especially given the number of references we see with Entrati or Entrati's eye appearing to be allied with it specifically. We may have just given the Indifference even more time to abscond with the good doctor. And if that's true, us showing up here may have been the catalyst that changed everything. This type of misdirection is not uncommon anymore. And for some reason, the void always seems to be one step ahead of us. And I think it's largely because we can never seem to know what's real and what's a deception. Rel and the rather odd similarities between what the man on the wall supposedly told us and what both he and Palladino tell our Tenno are just too close in nature. Is it really all just a coincidence? Did the operators all experience the exact same scenario? Or is this just a memory that someone else may have had and was offered as another manipulation? Have we been fooled into thinking that we all owe when just one was responsible?
Is that how you remember it? Yes. Good.
That would be exceptionally efficient and incredibly cruel at the same time, don't you think? I've often thought about how the man on the wall seems to twist his bargains to, let's say, benefit everybody. The recipient, of course, but himself as well, and the fine details of the last part are the ones appearing at the moment either in script so small we can't see, or in a language we just haven't figured out yet.
Master Entrati called it the Void Tongue. He feared it was meaningless, and feared more that it was not.
I think this stems from the bit of it that comes from Entrati himself. And I'd argue the right perspectives show an even darker possibility about the nature of the indifference in Warframe. I've attempted to explain the idea to some that indifference within this context alludes to what so many can identify with, at least at some point in their existence, with their own place among the ants around their feet. It's almost inevitable that at some point they will find their way into your home, perhaps onto your food, or even somehow making their way onto your person. How do you deal with such an incident? Well, more than most, especially when it's on food, we'll swat them away, squish, or wash them away without a moment's notice, caring much more about the food. That feeling of being able to smash a group of them without ever considering the effect you may have had upon their family, their structure, or the rest of the group's entire way of life. That is indifference. Entrati was indifferent in the very same way with all of the creatures he fed to the void in his original manic attempt to understand it and hopefully overcome it, showing the same kind of ruthless ambition that brought him to open the untimed door in the first place. Failure had made him bitter and reckless, willingly diving into the depths to prove mere people wrong. However, if there is a shred of humanity left somewhere within him, I believe it's within the idea that we may no longer be left with a choice in the matter. And I think that's what he's trying to portray within his plea. That we may have to, along the way, be forced to let go of the ones we so desperately cling to. It's the true cost of the deal. Rel seemed to understand it.
How could Rel have lived this long without the long dream?
In a way, he didn't. He knew his mortality would undo his purpose, so he gave up his humanity forever. He committed his soul to the undying vessel.
His Warframe.
Yes, he commanded we chain it within the depths of the sacred temple, an eternal vigil against the indifference.
And you believed him. You helped him do it.
Yes, after everything you've seen, wouldn't you?
I still believe there's a direct connection between he and the character known as Garmy, and I'd like to think he's the only one to ever stare the indifference down in their final confrontation. Well, At least the final one that we know of. Aware, but unafraid. Did he know something we don't? And does he yet still exist somewhere in Duviri? Shame we can't ask him, huh? And if we could, given that at best the Indifference is following us around, there's no question that, but at worst, as I've tried to show, it may even be using us as the conduit for whatever its endgame is. The way the operator was setting up to be a kind of positive force that could win with both aggressive negotiations, love as a kind of weapon almost, was a really unique way of showing such a dangerous warrior. But what if that is the very way by which the Indifference is exploiting the power it provided us? Can the Tenno let go of their connections, their friends, family, even lovers, to save everyone else if it was revealed to be necessary? Could you? With that being said, I hope you all enjoyed today's video and I got you thinking about situational manipulation toward the Tenno, the dark side of love. And if you really understand the contrast between being indifferent and choosing indifference, in the case that we would need, in fact, to choose, I hope at least I explained it well enough. At any rate, I hope you all have a wonderful day today, wonderful rest of your week, and I'll talk at you all in the next one. Take care, everybody.